Hello everyone, welcome back to another video where today I want to talk a little bit about some recent information found in the Disney Plus Season 2 press release that I haven't seen anyone make a video on, but I think it's really interesting and does go some way in providing somewhat of a counter-narrative to what we've been seeing recently reported by outlets like The Sun. Now, I want to make clear something very quickly before we get into that, though. I had a lot of comments on yesterday's video, and it's something that I've been having a lot of comments on recently, saying, oh, why cover The Sun's articles? Obviously, they are nonsense. Why cover them? And to a certain extent, I do understand that frustration. Ultimately, whilst I do think that there is some potential merit in some of the things that they're saying, I think ultimately a lot of it is guesswork. However, the reason why I cover those articles in the way that I do is that you cannot deny they are dominant in the conversation. Everyone who is anyone talks about those articles and what they are saying. Not just me, but pretty much every other Doctor Who news YouTuber you can think of. And a lot of these channels cover these articles rather, in my opinion, uncritically, without sharing what I think are fairly easy provable facts, or at the very least, logical conclusions made with some basis in reality rather than conjecture. So I think that if I can offer a look at these articles that is at least somewhat more based in reality, then I think that that is something that is worth doing and worth adding to the conversation, rather than just being one of the people who consumes these articles uncritically and regurgitates them to people. Does that make sense? That's my logic when I talk about these articles, because I think no matter what, they're going to get talked about. You can't avoid them. So I think the best thing you can do is embrace them and actually challenge what's said when it's wrong. And as we spoke about in that video, they get several basic facts with regards to the show incorrect. But anyway, going away from that, we actually have something official to talk about today. Disney have released their first real praise for Doctor Who's viewing figures since the partnership has been agreed. And it's got me wondering, if the deal isn't renewed, which I do think is still a possibility, don't get me wrong, this isn't proof that it's not going to not be renewed, it does make me wonder though what they wanted Doctor Who to do if not. Doctor Who Season 2 premieres April 12th across Disney Plus and BBC. Now, the rest of this is pretty much what we've already seen in the BBC press release, so I don't have to cover much of that. But there are a couple of things that this article adds that were not in the UK press release. First of all, we have this synopsis. The Doctor meets Belinda Chandra and begins an epic quest to get her back to Earth, but a mysterious force is stopping their return, and the time-travelling TARDIS team must face great dangers, bigger enemies, and wider terrors than ever before. So we didn't actually get this synopsis as part of the BBC rollout, but I think it's interesting because it kind of implies that Earth is going to be a less central location than previous, or at least modern day Earth, which I'm very much in favour of. I want to see more of the universe, I want to see the show expand. Obviously we know we've got a 1950s episode for episode 2, episode 3 looks like it takes place in the future. I would assume episode 4 is an Earthbound one dealing with Ruby, but then episodes 5, 6 and 7 could very well be off Earth, or at the very least in the past, which I'm very much in favour of. I would assume the finale would go back to Earth at some point, that makes sense to me. But yeah, very interested to see that. As I've said before, I've very much been a long-time advocate of the show going further than just Earth, in my opinion. I think there's a lot of potential with Doctor Who that it doesn't often quite realise, owing to the fact that it revisits Earth so often. But this is the bit that's really got me interested. It's in their About Doctor Who section. Quintessentially British, Doctor Who is one of the longest-running action-adventure series in the world, with legions of fans across the globe since it launched in 1963. Ncuti Gatwa took over the role in the Church on Ruby Road. Doctor Who remains one of the most watched programmes on iPlayer, and was a top 5 series on Disney Plus globally every week it aired. So this is significant because this is our first indication of how Doctor Who has been doing on Disney Plus officially. Obviously, there's been a lot of speculation, but Disney aren't as transparent as the BBC when it comes to their numbers because they're not a public service broadcaster, they are a private streaming company, so different rules apply essentially. They don't have to be as transparent when it comes to their numbers. But this is our first indication of how Doctor Who did. And by their own admission, they're saying that Doctor Who was in their top 5 programmes every single week of broadcast. That is very good. There's no other way of sugarcoating that. Objectively, that is good. And if you want to say that that's inaccurate, this is an official Disney Plus press release. And if you could say, oh, well, maybe they're lying to make the numbers look better, I don't really see what benefit that would have for Disney specifically. Obviously, it makes sense for the BBC to, kind of big up Doctor Who. But Doctor Who isn't a Disney franchise. It makes no odds to them how well or not well Doctor Who does. As far as they're concerned, they don't have to put this in here, but the fact that they have is interesting. Now again, I don't think this is necessarily evidence that Disney are going to continue the deal, but it does make me wonder, if this is the case, how much more could they realistically expect Doctor Who to do? In a video some time ago, I covered a podcast where they said they believe one of the reasons why Disney is non-committal about the deal is not so much that Doctor Who isn't being watched, but more that the people who are watching it aren't watching anything else on the service. So they're basically watching Doctor Who and then leaving Disney Plus, essentially. But I have to wonder, if that is the case, whose fault is that? Is that really Doctor Who's fault? Because ultimately, you can't really argue with top 5 every week of broadcast. And now I know some people will say, oh, but things like The Acolyte were in the top 5 and that got cancelled. Very, very different scenario. The Acolyte cost Disney over $200 million to make, around $28 million per episode. Doctor Who, as far as I can recall, was about $3 million per episode in cost, and of course that's split across the BBC and Disney as well. It's not just them funding it. So Doctor Who costs a fraction of things like The Acolyte and other shows like that. It is also worth noting that with shows like Percy Jackson that were a success, they did wait until season 1 broadcast before commissioning more. So maybe it is the case that that's what's happening here. Maybe we have completely overshot the speculation here. I still do remain hesitant though, because I do think that if this is true, I don't really understand what the holdup would be in commissioning another one. I don't know how much more you can realistically expect Doctor Who to do other than to be top 5 in the world on Disney Plus. I've also seen people bring up the Nielsen ratings and how it wasn't in the top 5 in the Nielsen ratings. However, as far as I know, the Nielsen ratings only cover America. So it's possible that whilst it didn't break the top 5 in America each week, combined globally, when you combine every territory, it was consistently in Disney's top 5 week to week to week. Maybe that's part of their concern, is that maybe America didn't perform as well as they wanted, and that was obviously a key market for them. But, I mean, it still seems like a good result, and it makes me wonder how much more that Disney can realistically expect from Doctor Who, which is, of course, a big franchise, but is also quite a bit more niche and out there than some of their other pieces of content. I don't think Doctor Who is ever going to quite have the mainstream appeal as something like Star Wars, owing to the fact that it is just a weird premise inherently. But there is other stuff I want to talk about here as well as being BBC's top drama for under 35s, this year making it one of the biggest programmes of the demographic across all streamers and broadcasters. So yeah, that was another thing that the BBC have said. We've heard this point before, but this is another thing I found really interesting. Doctor Who has a variety of licenses and partnerships spanning comics and collectibles, audiobooks, podcasts and magazines. Since 2012, over 17 million sonic screwdrivers and action figures, 19 million DVDs, and over 1 million tickets for Doctor Who live events have sold globally. In 2023, BBC iPlayer launched the Whoniverse, a dedicated area where UK viewers can see more than 800 shows within the orbit of Doctor Who, produced by Bad Wolf with BBC Studios for BBC and Disney branded television. So there's a lot to unpack there. First of all, 17 million sonic screwdrivers and action figures sold since 2012, 19 million DVDs, and over 1 million event tickets. I don't know whether these numbers have actually been said before. I'd assume they have, although I can't say that I've ever seen them. But again, this is from Disney officially, so I really doubt that it's inaccurate. And I think that this is one of the things that I've been trying to communicate for so long, and I've talked about the idea of Doctor Who being quote-unquote cancelled, in that I don't think it will. They've sold 17 million sonic screwdrivers and action figures in the last 10 years, and 19 million DVDs. Nothing the BBC has comes close to that level of market capitalization, and they'd frankly be silly to give all that up. You could say that they could keep that whilst not having the show running, but inevitably, the show being on is what fuels those sales. It's also interesting to me that they make specific mention of the Whoniverse in the UK. Obviously, this is just an About Doctor Who section, but it makes me wonder if part of the reason Disney is playing coy, and this is something I've mentioned previously, is what they really want, as well as Doctor Who as it exists currently, is the back catalogue. That's what they're trying to get, because getting 800 odd episodes of television for them is like massive, and also would probably solve the potential issue I addressed earlier of Doctor Who fans internationally not remaining on the service. If they had access to the Doctor Who back catalogue as the UK audience do, you therefore have a reason for Doctor Who fans to remain subscribed even when a new series isn't coming out. Perhaps that's the reason why they haven't agreed to a new series yet. I'm not saying that that is the reason, but it is something that I think is worth considering, and as I said, it would increase the value proposition of Disney Plus for Doctor Who fans specifically hugely. Some people have said that it could be just that they want to see if season 1 was a fluke, or whether it can sustain that level of success, which I suppose would make sense, but it doesn't change the fact that Ncuti did say that he was expecting to film Doctor Who in February on the Graham Norton show, which was then cut. So something has obviously changed somewhere in the equation. Maybe it is what I said previously, that Doctor Who fans aren't sticking around on the service long enough, but again, it feels kind of unfair to say that that's Doctor Who's fault if that is the case. Ultimately, if this is to be believed, Doctor Who held up its side of the bargain. It put the Doctor Who viewers on Disney Plus. It's then up to Disney Plus to determine what else they can watch. But let me know what you guys think about this. It's a very interesting topic, and I'm sure the comments will be wonderful, as always, when it comes to talking about Disney and Doctor Who and the current state of things. But thank you for watching. Subscribe if you're new, like if you enjoyed, and I will see you later.